What if I told you that somewhere in the archives of a forgotten psychiatric hospital in Romania, there lies a file that would challenge everything you believe about life, death, and the human soul? A file containing the testimony of a woman who claimed she had lived and died not once, not twice, but 6 separate times before she was ever born into this world. Her name was Alina Vasilescu, and her story is one that historians refuse to discuss. Doctors couldn't explain, and the church tried desperately to bury. In 1953, a young woman walked into the St. Dymphna Psychiatric Institute in Bucharest, Romania. She was 24 years old, with dark circles under her eyes that seemed to hold centuries of exhaustion. What made Alina different from the hundreds of other patients wasn't her appearance, but what she carried with her: detailed memories of 6 different lives, 6 different deaths, and 6 different centuries that she claimed to have lived through before being born as Alina Vasilescu. But here's where it gets truly unsettling. Everything she described, every historical detail, every personal account of events that occurred hundreds of years before her birth, could be verified. Historians checked, archaeologists investigated, documents were uncovered, and not a single fact could be disproven. Dr. Georgi Moldovan was the psychiatrist assigned to Alina's case. In his personal journals, discovered only in 2019 when the institute was demolished, he wrote, "I have spent 20 years treating patients with delusions of grandeur, false memories, and constructed fantasies. Alina Vasilescu is different. She doesn't just remember these lives, she carries their wounds, their fears, their knowledge. And God help me, I'm beginning to believe her." Alina's first claimed death occurred in the year 1247. She said she was a young peasant girl named Anka who lived in a small village near what is now Cluj-Napoca during the Mongol invasion of Transylvania. She claimed to have been trampled to death by horses while trying to protect her infant brother. The details she provided were horrifying in their specificity. She described the taste of blood in her mouth, the feeling of ribs cracking under hooves, and the last image she saw, her brother's face as a Mongol warrior's sword descended. What makes this particularly chilling is that Alina could speak fluent 13th century Romanian, a dialect that had been extinct for over 600 years. She knew farming techniques specific to that region and time period, could describe the exact layout of villages that archaeologists hadn't yet excavated, and worst of all, she would wake up screaming every night, clutching her chest and gasping about horses and blood. But the first death was just the beginning. Alina claimed her second death occurred in 1398 during the reign of Mircea the Elder. This time, she said she was a merchant's daughter named Ilinca who died of the plague in She could describe in excruciating detail the progression of the Black Death, the smell of rotting flesh, and the desperation of a city slowly consuming itself. She knew the names of streets that no longer existed, described buildings that were destroyed centuries ago, and could recite prayers in Latin that were specific to plague victims. Medical experts who examined Alina found something that defied explanation. Despite being born in 1929, long after the plague had been eradicated, she displayed a natural immunity to certain bacterial infections that was consistent with plague survivors. Her blood work showed antibodies that shouldn't have existed in someone of her generation. The third death, according to Alina, happened in 1513. She claimed to be a young woman named Magdalena who was accused of witchcraft in Brasov. She described her torture in the city's dungeons, the trial before the town council, and finally, burning alive at the stake. Alina knew details about medieval torture devices that weren't documented in any accessible texts at the time. She described the sensation of flames consuming her body, the smell of her own burning flesh, and the faces of the townspeople who watched. What made this account particularly disturbing was that Alina bore strange birthmarks across her body. These marks, according to medical examination, were consistent with severe burn scars. They covered approximately 30% of her body, yet she had never been burned in her current life. When doctors asked about the scars, Alina would simply say, Fire remembers, even when flesh forgets. Her fourth claimed death occurred in 1666, during the Great Fire of London. Alina insisted she was a baker's apprentice named Mary, who died trapped in a burning building on Pudding Lane. She could navigate the old streets of London from memory, describe the panic of the fleeing crowds, and detail the progression of the fire with an accuracy that impressed even British historians who later studied her case. But perhaps most unsettling was her ability to speak perfect 17th century English, complete with archaic pronunciations and grammatical structures that she couldn't have learned anywhere in communist Romania. She would sometimes slip into this dialect during therapy sessions, pleading in an Old English accent for someone to help her escape the flames. The fifth death, Alina claimed, happened during the French Revolution in 1793. Said she was a young aristocrat named Marie Claire who died by guillotine in Paris. Alina could describe the inside of the conciergerie prison, the jeers of the crowds, and the final moments before the blade fell. She knew the names of prisoners who were never recorded in official documents, could describe the daily routines of prison life, and spoke French with a dialect specific to 18th century Parisian nobility. When French historians examined her testimony, they found that Alina had described several executions that weren't in any public records but were later confirmed through newly discovered private journals and letters. She knew intimate details about the lives of nobles who had left no historical trace, except in family documents that weren't made public until decades after Elena's death. The sixth and final death, Alina claimed occurred in 1854. During the Crimean War, she said she was a nurse named Catherine who died of typhus while caring for wounded soldiers in Scutari. Alina could describe the horrific conditions of the military hospitals, the faces of soldiers she claimed to have treated, and the progression of the disease that killed her. Medical records later confirmed that Alina's body showed signs of having survived typhus. Despite no recorded infection in her current lifetime, she carried antibodies specific to the disease and showed scarring patterns consistent with severe, fever-related symptoms. But here's where Alina's story becomes truly terrifying. According to her testimony, each death wasn't random. She claimed that in each life, she was searching for something, someone she had lost in her very first existence. A child, she said, taken from her in a life so ancient she couldn't remember when or where it happened. Each subsequent life was a punishment, a quest to find this lost soul, and each death brought her no closer to redemption. Dr. Moldovan's journals revealed that as Alina's treatment progressed, she began to exhibit behaviors that couldn't be explained by any known psychological condition. She would sleep for exactly 3 hours each night, always waking at the same time, regardless of when she went to bed. During these brief sleep periods, she would speak in languages that linguists couldn't identify, ancient dialects that seemed to predate recorded history. More disturbing were her physical changes. Alina began to age rapidly during her time at the institute. Within 6 months, her hair turned completely white, her skin developed deep wrinkles, and her eyes took on a milky, cataract-like appearance. Yet medical tests showed she was in perfect health. It was as if her body was trying to catch up with the centuries her soul had lived. The most chilling entry in Dr. Moldovan's journal dates to December 21, 1953. He wrote, "Alina came to my office today and told me she had finally remembered her first life, her original existence. She was a mother in a civilization that existed before recorded history, before the great floods that reshaped our world. She said her child was taken by beings she couldn't describe, entities that existed between life and death. Her punishment for failing to protect this child was to live and die repeatedly, searching through time for a soul that may no longer exist. Today, she told me, would be her last day in this life. Tomorrow, she said, she would either find peace or begin the cycle again." On December 22, 1953, Alina Vasilescu was found dead in her room at the St. Dymphna Psychiatric Institute. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but there were no signs of heart disease. She was found lying peacefully on her bed, her hands folded across her chest, a slight smile on her lips. The only unusual detail was a small, withered flower clutched in her right hand, a species that botanists couldn't identify and that had never been seen in Romania. Dr. Moldovan's final journal entry about Alina reads, "She looked younger in death than she had in months. The wrinkles were gone. Her hair had returned to its original dark color, and her eyes were clear and bright. It was as if dying had finally set her free. I pray that wherever Elena's soul has gone, she has finally found the peace she searched for across centuries of pain." But the story doesn't end with Elena's death. 3 days after her funeral, strange reports began to surface from around Bucharest. Multiple witnesses claimed to have seen a young woman matching Elena's description walking through the city's old cemetery, calling out a name in a language no one could understand. Security guards at the cemetery reported finding fresh flowers on graves that dated back hundreds of years, flowers of the same unknown species found in Elena's hand. More unsettling were the testimonies of other psychiatric patients at St. Dymphna. Several claimed that Alina had visited them in their dreams after her death, warning them about something she called the Watchers, beings that existed between worlds and fed on human suffering across multiple lifetimes. These patients, previously stable, began exhibiting symptoms similar to Elena's, claiming memories of lives they had never lived and deaths they had never experienced. The Romanian Orthodox Church took an unusual interest in Elena's case after her death. Church officials confiscated all of Dr. Moldovan's files, along with any physical evidence related to Elena's stay at the institute. When pressed for an explanation, church representatives simply stated that the case involved matters beyond the understanding of modern science. In 1974, 21 years after Elena's death, construction workers renovating the St. Dymphna Institute made a disturbing discovery. Hidden behind a false wall in Elena's former room, they found dozens of documents written in her handwriting. These weren't the rambling notes of a disturbed mind, but detailed historical accounts, maps of ancient civilizations, and most chilling of all, predictions about future events that would later come to pass with frightening accuracy. Among these hidden documents was a letter addressed to whoever finds this, dated just days before Elena's death. In it, she wrote, "I have remembered everything now. The Watchers, the lost child, the endless cycle of death and rebirth. I was not the first to carry this burden, nor will I be the last. They choose us, the mothers who have lost children, and they use our love as a chain to bind us to this endless search. But I have found a way to break the cycle. Death is not the end for souls like ours, it's simply another door. I go now to find my child, not in another life, but in the space between lives, where the Watchers cannot follow." The letter concluded with a warning that has haunted researchers for decades. If you are reading this, then you have been chosen to tell my story. But beware, for in telling it, you may attract their attention. The Watchers are always listening, always searching for new souls to torment with impossible quests. Trust no dreams that show you lives you've never lived, and if you begin to remember deaths that aren't your own, run. Run as far as you can, for once they mark you, the only escape is through the space between worlds, and that journey requires a sacrifice most cannot make. Today, Alina Vasilescu's case remains one of the most documented, yet officially denied cases of claimed reincarnation in modern history. Her files are sealed in Vatican archives, her testimony is dismissed by mainstream historians, and mention of her name is discouraged in academic circles. Yet those who have studied her case, who have read Dr. Moldovan's journals and examined the evidence, are left with questions that challenge our understanding of consciousness, memory, and the nature of death itself. Was Alina Vasilescu a mentally ill woman whose delusions happened to align with historical facts? Was she somehow accessing genetic memories passed down through generations, or was she exactly what she claimed to be? A soul trapped in an endless cycle of death and rebirth, searching across centuries for something that could never be found. Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is the one Alina herself suggested. In her final letter, perhaps there are beings that exist beyond our understanding of life and death. entities that feed on human suffering and use our deepest loves and losses as weapons against us. Perhaps Elena's story is not unique, but one of thousands of similar cases that have been systematically hidden from public knowledge. In the abandoned ruins of St. Dymphna Psychiatric Institute, urban explorers still report strange phenomena. Voices speaking in ancient languages echo through empty corridors. Flowers of unknown species grow in rooms that have been sealed for decades, and sometimes, visitors claim to see a young woman with dark circles under her eyes, walking the halls and calling out a name in a language that predates recorded history. Whether Alina Vasilescu found the peace she sought in death, or whether she continues her eternal search in forms we cannot perceive, remains a mystery. But her story serves as a chilling reminder that there may be aspects of existence that science cannot explain. Forces that operate beyond our understanding of life and death. And perhaps most terrifying of all, the possibility that death is not the end of our suffering, but simply another chapter in a story that stretches across eternity. The next time you have a vivid dream about a life you've never lived, or feel an inexplicable connection to a historical period you've never studied, remember remember her warning about the Watchers, and ask yourself, are these dreams simply products of your imagination, or are they memories of lives your soul has lived before? And if they are memories, what are you searching for across the centuries? And what price will you pay to find it? Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some stories better left untold. But Alina Vasilescu's tale reminds us that truth is often stranger and more terrifying than fiction, and that the line between life and death may not be as clear as we believe. In the end, her story poses a question that each of us must answer. For ourselves, if you could remember every life you've ever lived and every death you've ever died, would you want to? Or would that knowledge be a burden too terrible to bear? Alina Vasilescu claimed to have died 6 times before her birth. The question that remains is whether death truly ended her search, or whether somewhere, in a realm between life and death, she continues her eternal quest for a child lost in the mists of time, forever watched by entities whose hunger spans millennia and whose patience is as infinite as the suffering they create.